Good afternoon, everybody. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to take your seat, we'll try to start on time, which is now. Welcome to this first session of the Subtem 1, which is about global deforestation challenge and opportunity for concrete action to halt forest loss by 2030, and you remember that the operative word or sentence in the Glasgow Declaration during COP26. So this year, 2022, it's 8 years to 2020, so it's even more critical in terms of we need to accelerate and we need to deliver in terms of forestry and in terms of collectively reduce deforestation and degradation. So this event will set the stage for the Subtem 1 of the conference of the World Forestry Congress. And today we will be hearing the perspective from tropical forest countries such as Ghana, Colombia, Ecuador, Indonesia, and some subtropical countries, Argentina or Egypt, and from donor and multilateral organizations. Within the next 90 minutes, and it's a very tight, packed agenda, we will discuss verifiable forest action, the global deforestation trends, current drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, and how to further bring to forefront forest solution, because that's important. I mean, we should stop talking of the problem. We should look at actionable solution. In terms of investment policies, and for such solution to be recognized, rewarded, and enhanced. But to start off, let us welcome Madame Maria Elena Semedo, the FAO Deputy Director General, that will introduce us. Madame Semedo.
Good afternoon to all. Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, dear participants, distinguished delegates, welcome to this session on global deforestation, challenge and opportunities for concrete action to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. The first of the Turning the Tide, Reversing Deforestation and Forest Degradation Subteam. Although global deforestation has slowed in recent years, the latest Global Forest Resource Assessment shows that deforestation continues at an alarming rate of 10 million hectares per year. And the Assessment Global Remote Sensing Survey reveals that the impact of agricultural expansion on forests is greater than previous thought, driving almost 90% of global deforestation. This figure stresses the critical need for cross-sectoral efforts. Increasing agri-food productivity to meet the demands of a growing population and halting deforestation are not mutually exclusive. We can reach both. For true sustainable transformation of our agri-food system, it is essential to recognize the role of forests in support of agriculture and promote agricultural practices compatible with forest conservation. Increased political will and financial and technical support can make this a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest IPCC report highlights the important role of halting deforestation to address the climate crisis. As the Deputy Secretary General reminded us at the recent United Nations Environment Assembly, drastically reducing deforestation and systematically restoring forests and other ecosystems is the single largest nature-based opportunity for climate mitigation. Forest-based solutions are also key to address today's health, biodiversity, food security, and inequality crisis. calls for action are loud and clear from the United Nations Secretary General, turning the tide of deforestation at the 2019 United Nations Climate Summit, to the COP26 Glasgow Climate Pact and the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use. 2022 is a critical year to accelerate and scale up delivery on our commitments and to collectively reduce deforestation and forest degradation. Now, it is the time to put our pledges into action. Tropical forested countries, which have been working on their REDD+ processes for over 10 years, demonstrated that reducing deforestation and related emission is achievable. Changing structural drivers of deforestation is as much an issue of speed and scales as it is of determination. Much still remains to be done. While there is no magic formula, solutions exist, and we know them. Improve landscape planning, governance, secure tenure, and sustainably intensify agri-food system, just to name a few. We must engage all stakeholders, and I think throughout the different events we had today, it has been said that no one has the solution, but together we can have the solution. From governments, local communities, women and indigenous people, to smallholders, the private sector, science and academia. And public and private finance need to be drastically scaled up. Colleagues, friends, dear participants, the countries and organizations here today will provide valuable insights into the roadmap to scale up efforts. We are honored by their presence and look forward to the exchange. FAO, with UNRED and other key initiatives and partners, is fully committed to support member countries to achieve concrete, deep, and systemic change by addressing the underlying drivers of deforestation while advancing sustainable development goals. It is time to pass from an era of negotiations, commitment, and pledges to an era of ambitious action at scale, a decade of achievements in reducing deforestation and actively restore land and ecosystem. It is a unique chance for us today and for the future. Thank you again, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Madame Semedo. Can we have the slide? I have them here, but yeah. I'm going to give you a brief introduction overview on the issue of forests as a nature-based solution. And we have a tendency to believe that we are somewhat special. This is something that is maintained in most of our culture, religion, or constitution. And in a sense, we are. Humans are the only super predator. There is no species that we cannot kill, and being a mere fraction of the living biomass, we have overused 70% of our world to the point that we have created a special geological era, the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene, our influence on planetary system has become global for the first time in human history. And because of the action during the last 100 years, several planetary-wide processes appear close to reach their tipping points. And then you see that we have overshoot the 4, now 5 of the planetary boundaries. We are continue emitting more and more greenhouse gases. We have several dozen of millions of people expected to push back into extreme poverty because of the pandemic and so on. And then we have reached the point where we are triggering planetary size tipping point. And for the forest, the dying of the Amazon, that is unfortunately forecasted for eventually the last 20 years, and its transformation in a savanna is one of these planetary tipping points. And the problem is that it's not the only one. I mean, it's sort of, you have a set of these planetary tipping points that are on the verge of being triggered. And what is problematic is that they are not independent. So the melting of the Arctic can provoke a speeding or slowing of the Atlantic current, and that can create a dry condition in the Amazon, and the Amazon transform into a savanna, and then there is a feedback in terms of rainfall. So we are facing titanic change, and the problem is we don't really matter in the force of this titanic change. I mean, it's sort of, we have to realize that the issue is not about saving Earth, it's about saving ourselves. And if we want to save ourselves, and if we want to survive the 6 mass extension that we have created, we need effectively to do something. And if we want to beat the odds and survive a little bit more than the average civilization in history, which you can see is about 340 years, and if you think our civilization started during the industrial era in 18-something, we are close to the expiration date of our civilization. So if we want to save our civilization, if we want to continue to have a decent living and improve the condition of living, we need to take matters into our hands. And the problem is that society collapses because climate change, environment is degraded, natural resources are depleted, inequality increases, the society becomes too complex, is hit by external shock, and then you have the bad luck. You end up with a meteorite on your head or something. And to fight this, or to avoid this planetary tipping point, we need to go to another concept, which is a social tipping point. And the social tipping points are based on the same concept of a rapid, brutal change that is triggered by the evolution of a socio variable. And the tipping point is that magic moment where an idea, a trend, or social behavior cross a threshold and spread like a wildfire. And possible social tipping points are like removing fossil fuels and other perverse subsidies, building carbon neutral cities, divesting from assets linked to fossil fuel, strengthening climate education and engagement. And in our matters, halting deforestation and degradation and restoring degraded land is definitely a big social tipping point. At the COP26, the global leader committed to work collectively to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030, while delivering sustainable development and promoting an inclusive rural transformation. So that's the global declaration. But here, at the 15th World Forestry Congress, it is time again to reinforce the message of the importance of forest entry. So why forest entries matter? And why forests are critical nature-based solutions for more than the climate emergency? Assuming that the world pursues the achievement of the net zero by 2050, we need about 230 gigaton of CO2 equivalent in emission reduction and removal over 2030 to reach the value in 2030 that will give us a net zero by 2050. Assuming that we fully implement the forest element of the Glasgow Declaration, that will contribute of about 10% of this global goal. And that means that 90% of the rest is left to the other sectors: energy, fossil fuel, cement, agriculture, food, waste. But 10% is not negligible already. But what I would like to insist on is that there are plenty of reasons why we need to protect, conserve, restore forests beyond their greenhouse gases emission reduction potential. And first and foremost, maybe, as we mentioned before, is the risk of tripping some planetary tipping point. But forests are also the most biodiverse terrestrial ecosystem and valuable in mitigation of biodiversity loss. Forests provide a huge potential in terms of climate change. Forest landscape restoration offers a huge potential in terms of both economic and environmental benefits. Forests are one of the best tools in terms of ecosystem-based adaptation, regulating hydrological services, providing watershed regulation, offering coastal protection, mitigating climate extremes. Forests and trees are also important for the bioeconomy. If we want to move from fossil fuel to a bio-based economy, and if we want to replace concrete or cement by wood, we need wood. And the only thing that produces wood is a tree. There is nothing else that produces wood. So, and you can see the potential of replacing 1 ton of wood is the equivalent of replacing 2.2 tons of CO2 when you use wood instead of cement. And forests create jobs and wealth also. They are very important for the economy. They are important for food security. Forests are covering the 4 dimensions of food security: food availability, access to food, food utilization, stability over time. And forests sustain agriculture via the provision of ecosystem services, pollination, pest control, water regulation, climate regulation. Forest is good for your well-being, to the point that the Japanese are inventing a term, Shinrin-yoku, which is a Japanese bath. On the other side, if you degrade forest, then you may have some pandemics and some emerging diseases. So I hope that I have convinced you that it's now time to act, and we cannot simply stop, discuss, negotiate, look at what the other is doing. We need to have some collective action in terms of going beyond commitment into actionable solution in terms of reduction of deforestation, land degradation, and compensating biodiversity loss. Thank you very much for this quick introduction. Now, what we're all here to is our panelists, and I will introduce our first panel. This first panel will be about our country realizing forest solution, and we will look at countries that have addressed deforestation coming from agricultural commodity and how they are forged the path to deforestation-free agriculture. So I'm pleased to introduce and call Excellency Bianca Dagher, who is the Vice Minister of Environment for Ecuador. Bianca, please. Then the Honorable Adriana Lucha Santamendez from Colombia. She is the Director of Forest, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in the Ministry of Environment. Welcome Honorable Thomas Yaogambra, Akwoba, Manager of Program MRV and Climate Change Directorate, the Forestry Commission in Ghana. And last and not least, I would like to invite Mr. Gustavo Sanchez Valle, the President of the Board, Director of the Red MOCAF in Mexico, to represent the indigenous people and local community. So, we have a very good panel here, and let me start first by Excellency Bianca. Ecuador's efforts to achieve a sustainable production model decoupled from deforestation are a beacon for other nations and stakeholders. That proves that economic growth and environmental conservation can be a mutually supportive and harmonizing process. Bianca, how did you do that in Ecuador? Can you tell us? How do you bring together various sectors and efforts under one collective vision?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and having us, the Ecuadorian government, in this panel. Thank you so much, the FAO also for organizing, and the government of Korea as well for hosting us. So thank you so much for the question, and I'll try to summarize it in what the efforts of Ecuador has been together with the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Economic Transition. So the first thing is to have, a vision, and that's something that with our administration we added ecological transition in our mission, and ecological transition, it's an economic transition as well. So one of our main goals, it was also to be, a cross-cutting impact in the economy of Ecuador, and now we are part of the production committee, the National Production Committee, and normally the Ministry of Environment are not in these areas, so that's a huge impact that we're having. The second one is Ecuador is recognized for being a REDD+ pioneer. We were one of the first countries to submit, and one of the first countries to implement a project. So far, we have been working with the GEF, with the GCF, and with the governments of Norway and Germany in two main projects, Pro-Amazonia and REDD+ Early Movers. And after years of working together, not only in the Amazon region, but also in the mangroves and the dry woods, forests of Ecuador, we have come a very long way. And something that we really take into account, you cannot have the approach of conservating the forests only. In countries as Ecuador, you have to take into consideration that the most successful way is to understand that forest is also a social dimension, an economic dimension, and a cultural dimension, especially who are taking care of our forests. So embracing that means to have a higher conception and to reach better results. So I'm very honored to announce that we are now about to launch our next public policy, which is a national certification of deforestation-free products. And actually they are chains. And that has been, the result of working and having the information and be working together with the people that understand which are the drivers of deforestation in our forests, understanding what are the crops that really are putting pressure in our forests. And we have been working with traceability of palm oil, cocoa, coffee, and cattle. And but along with the national certification, we have pilot exports. So we have export 2 containers, one of cocoa for Belgium and one of coffee to Italy. And we're looking for a long-term commercial relationship with Italy with deforestation-free products. So this means definitely a huge impact in the local communities as well. But also, that's also something that we need to work together globally. This is a really challenging for countries as Ecuador, and we cannot do it by ourselves. This is the time where, trade between different countries definitely are opportunities to settle the kind of products that we do have in the shelves around the world. So I respectfully will ask for the whole world, for the northern countries to embrace this, and we really need financial support. If not, then we will only make the gaps bigger between small producers and large-scale producers of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving to another Latin America country, Colombia. Adriana, Colombia is known to be very engaged in halting deforestation, and you recently received result-based payment from the GCF for its progress. So, could you explain which combination of public policy, instrument, and partnership with private sector you have designed and implemented, and maybe share as an example what are some of the key factors how you successfully transform your agricultural systems?
Bueno, primero que todo un saludo y un agradecimiento al gobierno de Corea, a la FAO y al Servicio.
First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to FAO as well as the Korean government. Thank you very much for successfully organizing the 15th World Forest Congress. As for the forest policy of the Colombian government, this is a direction that we've been taking so far. First of all, Colombia has the second largest biodiversity in the world, and by 2030, we will be able to reduce 51% of greenhouse gas emissions. And to that end, we're going to be working very closely with local communities as well as the international community. We have a goal to reduce deforestation to zero. That is the target that we have, and we want to achieve by 2030. First of all, we're trying to modernize our public policies in regard to forestation. About 1 million hectares of land will be covered by the Climate Action Law. So we have legislated that law. And by 2030, we're going to be pursuing the law. And we have also introduced environmental taxes. So taxing people to pay for the services. And at the same time, we also want to be able to promote sustainable environmental governance. Until 2022, by the end of this year, about 18 million trees are going to be planted continuously. And the production value chain will be scaled up across the country. So these are some of the activities under our plan for now. And also cacao and coffee and milk, as well as meat. There are 5 different areas where we have reached agreements on. And we will be signing what we call Carbon Neutrality Pact for these 5 different categories. So that we can continue to pursue sustainable production. And at the same time, improve economic efficiency across the board. We want to achieve the economies of scale to make our economy more sustainable. We're a forest country, you can say, because 53% of our land is forest. And on top of that, About 53% of the land is actually occupied by Aborigines. So they are continuing to become a very important member of the community in terms of production and providing services from forestry. So it is very important to take care of the forest and to have a sustainable use of forest services. We want to make sure that local communities can continue to engage in continuous and sustainable production. And about 44% of the Amazon area in Colombia and we can say that we're continuing to use and provide ecosystem services from Amazon. And in the case of Amazon area in Colombia, deforestation has already been reduced.
Cocoa in the world, Ghana. And we all like our chocolate, and we like our chocolate even better if it's deforestation-free and if it brings equitable income to the people that are producing it. Thomas, Ghana has been promoting green climate-smart cocoa agriculture to enhance local livelihood while contributing to national climate mitigation target. Can you share your experience, how you did it, what you are doing?
Thank you very much, Robert, and thanks to everyone here. Thanks to FAO for this invitation. First, I would like to say this. I am a son to a cocoa farmer, and my father's father, too, was a cocoa farmer, and my education has largely been supported through cocoa farming. So it tells you that cocoa farming is mainly a family thing. It goes beyond just normal business. It's a family thing. And I have friends who are similar in this instance. But beyond that, cocoa farming gives the Ghanaian economy about $1.2 billion annually. And it tells you the extent of effect that cocoa farming has in Ghana. But we've realized one thing and one thing only, that cocoa farming is leading to deforestation and forest degradation, and we needed to change this whole history since it was introduced into the country over 100 years ago. So what we did basically can be summed up in 6 ways. The first one is institutional coordination and arrangement. We have 2 key institutions in Ghana. That's one is the Forestry Commission, where I work. The other one is the Ghana Cocoa Board. Hitherto, you will never see these 2 institutions sitting together around the same table. So we realized that we needed to come together so that we can work towards this goal of removing deforestation from the cocoa value chain. Now we have lots of institutions also along the cocoa value chain. Now we have all of these institutions coming around the Forestry Commission and the Ghana Cocoa Board to remove deforestation from the value chain. We have now coordination both at the national and the sub-national levels. So when you go to the sub-national levels, for instance, we have licensed buying companies, cocoa buying companies, we have big brands teaming up with the Forestry Commission and the Ghana Cocoa Board. So that's the very first one, that's institutional coordination. To be able to have this change, institutions need to come together and work towards that one goal. The second one is about community governance structures. You need to put the communities together. The communities have 100 years of history planting cocoa. So they have that knowledge. How do we harness that knowledge so that we remove deforestation from that value chain? That's the second thing that we've done as a country. Bringing the communities together, putting in place governance structures within the communities, and identifying what we call hotspot intervention areas. That's areas with high deforestation rates. And these are areas that have high cocoa production, high population. So that's the second thing that we have done. The third that I would want to add is implementation of what we call climate smart cocoa practices. Incorporation of trees. into cocoa farms, you realize that people would clear the whole of forest and decide to plant trees. And we are now incorporating trees on farms. We have introduced what we call hand pollination method, so that within a very small area, people are now harvesting more cocoa than before. The fourth one is what I call financing the transitions. You know, this is a practice that has been ensured for a long time, and you want people to move from that practice to what we are calling sustainable practice. It takes some time, it takes financing. And how do we go about this? One, we are providing additional and alternative livelihoods for the people, the cocoa farmers. We've developed what we call rural service centers, where we bring the youth together to train them on giving agricultural services to farmers who are relatively old. So they help them with pruning, they help them with the hand pollination that I talked about. So it will remove the youth from going to illegal logging and all sorts of things. It will bring income to the youth. That's the fourth thing that we've done. In all of this, one key thing that we've realized is policy reforms. You can't use the same policies that we were having previously to enforce change. So we've changed our forest and wildlife policy from one that was quite consumptive based to non-consumptive based, and combining the two. We've realized we need to change our tree tenure system, and because we are encouraging farmers to now plant trees. So ownership of tree, especially naturally occurring tree, is key here for us. The sixth thing that we've done, and which we are doing, is rehabilitation of degraded forest reserves. We are using an approach called the modified Tonja system, where a forest reserve communities plant food crops. And once they plant the food crops, they plant the trees as well. The food crops belong to them. In that, they become very much engaged. I heard our deputy minister talking about the social, the economic, and the environment. So that's the social aspect of it. They are protecting the environment, and they are planting the trees in these degraded forests. So these are the 6 key things that we are doing in Ghana. One benefit that I would like to mention, when you go around and you are talking about change in anything, the farmer would ask, would it lead to increase in yield? And that's what we've realized over the period, what this practices. So for instance, we are recording now from 450 kg per hectare yield to around 600 kg per hectare yield. And these are things that the farmers are looking for, and these practices are leading to them. The other one is such that we have this cocoa forest program that we have in our NDCs. When you look at Ghana's NDCs, for instance, so it's responding to the local need, and it's responding to a global need as well, so that we can keep to the 1.5 degree. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Now, an old friend of this indigenous people and local community group told me once, a sort of, if you are not sitting at the table, you very quickly end up in the menu. So now we'll have Gustavo, and the full and effective participation of indigenous people and local community is critical if we want to achieve what was decided during the Paris Agreement, and was largely recognized in Glasgow, the role of local community and indigenous people. Can you indicate what are the main challenges to be concretely implemented to go beyond word, and which could be the 3-4 solutions that you think should be promoted? And I think you have slides, Gustavo. Can we have the slides, please?
Sí, gracias. Quisiera comentar que voy a compartir los puntos de vista tanto de organizaciones de base como...
First of all, I would like to share with you various perspectives of different organizations here. So I work at this organization in Mexico, and I'll be speaking on behalf of that organization, and at the same time, I want to take a moment to share with you some of the views that are expressed by the IPLC. I'd like to take this moment to thank FAO as well as the Korean government for giving me this opportunity to speak today. For a very long time, we've been suffering from the pandemic, and we have come to hold the Forestry Congress today, and this is very meaningful indeed. So here, the topic of my presentation is IPLC. And I want to underscore the importance of the indigenous and the local community once again in our efforts. While we are having a discourse and discussion on this topic, it is high time that we take action. Again, I want to take a chance to look at the barriers that are impeding the full and effective participation of IPLC. Now, according to the presentation here, there's the ILO Convention 169. This is the convention that is related to the indigenous communities. However, there are countries that have still not signed the ILO Convention 169. Then there could be areas in which the rights of the indigenous people cannot be fully acknowledged. And of course, there could be issues in terms of consultation, also in terms of making the fair payment, and indigenous people may not be target of the consultation or negotiation process. They may not be fully engaged. And in order to have effective consultation and negotiation, we need to have financial resources. But countries that have not signed on to the convention could rightfully say that they don't have the budget or the money to proceed with such process. And when, for example, governments are trying to carry out the consultation process, because they're not part of the convention, they may not necessarily feel the need or rationale to engage the indigenous people. And they may not be fully recognize the rights and the ownership of the indigenous people in terms of land and territory. So I have a few suggestions to make to ensure full and effective participation of IPLC. I want to go back to the Cancun safeguards, which were discussed at the COP16 at UNFCCC to have a minimum floor in legal matters of participation. First of all, countries really need to recognize the importance of ILO Convention 169. So we need to raise the visibility of the convention. And also, we should implement intensive capacity building processes on PPE, both in governments and IPLC, including the design of spaces for participation, dialogue, and co-creation of policies initiatives. And we need to develop tools for the design of budgets for participation and consultation processes. And we need to adopt the LC identification and self-identification criteria that community organizations in Latin America have built in dialogue with organizations in Asia. So again, I want to emphasize the importance of adopting such criteria that was developed related to local community identification. So it is really important to proceed with this process.
And we reached the end of this panel, almost in time, so thank you very much all. We will now have, while we transit to the next panel, a video that will show you how an individual sparked a movement in a community to put an end on unsustainable farming practice. So if I may ask, and if you launch the video.
Xin chào, tôi là John Bên Giá. Tôi muốn góp một phần nhỏ bé trong việc thay đổi cái phương thức canh tác không bền vững cho bà con tại quê hương của mình. Quê hương tôi được biết đến với con lươn thành huyền thoại làm nên Hồ Lắc và núi Chi Dương Sinh hùng vĩ với những cánh đồng rộng mênh mông được mệnh danh là vựa lúa của tỉnh Đắk Lắk.
Tuy nhiên, những năm vừa qua với sự khai thác cạn kiệt, tận thu thiên nhiên đã nổi giận. Hàng năm thường xảy ra xói mòn, lũ lụt, mất mùa. Anh John mong muốn tạo nên sự thay đổi cho đời sống dân làng tốt đẹp hơn. Anh trăn trở suy nghĩ cách để thuyết phục được bà con. Anh tìm tới trưởng bản, người có uy tín trong buôn để nhờ sự giúp đỡ. Qua nhiều lần gặp gỡ và trao đổi, cùng nhau làm vườn, làm rẫy, trưởng bản đã dần thấu hiểu những tâm tư và nguyện vọng của anh và đồng ý sẽ cùng anh vận động bà con trong làng.
Cái vấn đề sản xuất bền vững thì nó mang lại hiệu quả hơn. Cho nên là tôi đã quyết định cùng anh John vận động bà con nhân dân rồi để bảo vệ môi trường vừa là tăng năng suất.
Bà con cũng dần nhận ra những thiện ý của anh John và cũng bắt đầu thực hiện thay đổi phương thức canh tác, không còn đốt nương làm rẫy lấn vào rừng tự nhiên. Ngoài ra, bà con cũng học cách chọn giống cây trồng luân canh phù hợp với điều kiện tại địa phương để có được mùa màng bội thu, cho rừng xanh và chim thú có cơ hội sinh tồn và sinh sôi nảy nở.
Thay vì sử dụng thuốc diệt cỏ, thì nay bà con nông dân đã sử dụng máy phát cỏ vừa nhanh hiệu quả lại không ảnh hưởng tới môi trường.
So you can see that if there is a will, there is a possibility to do something. We are now going to move into our second panel, which is about, we are the first one was what the people on the ground were doing, and the second one is about rewarding this forest solution and how can we mobilize 5 billion in 2025 and close the funding gaps. And here I just want us, while our ladies, to pause for a second. In 2021, we beat one record. That's the first year in human history that we spent $2 trillion in military expenditure. So we are able to spend $2 trillion a year in military expenditure, and we have difficulties to find 5 billion to reward forest solution. So we need to put our priority right, people, because otherwise we are going to problems. So our second panel, let me first introduce Ms. Karin Edsberg, which is a senior advisor from the Ministry of Climate and Environment, Norway. Karin, please. From the Green Climate Fund, we have Benjamin Singer, senior forest and land use specialist. Benjamin. We'll have Martin Monaco, but he will be online. He's the National Director of Forestry in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. We would like to welcome Her Excellency Gandhi Sulistianto, Ambassador. Bapak, silakan. And finally, Dr. Ali Abosena, the CEO of the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency of the Arabic Republic of Egypt. Dr. Abosena. So, yeah, we have all our panelists. We have Martin online. Let's start by Norway, a big player, if any, in the whole issue of climate change. Karin, the Paris Agreement cannot be met without forests, of course. And last year we had 141 leaders that signed, endorsed the Glasgow Declaration. But this Glasgow Declaration is a non-binding pledge so far. So can you tell us what are the concrete actions that need to be taken by the signatories to make moving from an area of negotiation to an area of massively scaled up implementation? And how can government catalyst to incentivize private capital flow and accelerate reducing deforestation impact in emerging economies? Easy question.
Thank you. Is the microphone on? Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's an incredibly important discussion that we're having. It's been made very clear by previous speakers how serious the situation is with continued tropical deforestation, as shown by the Global Forest Watch last week, and also how crucial it is to be able to meet the climate goals of the Paris Agreement. And we know that there is a huge gap between the needed and the actual investments in transformation in the forest and land sector. So the Glasgow Declaration is an important milestone with 142 countries signing up. That includes countries from the north, from the south, and you could say that following up the Glasgow Declaration has three main actors: the forest countries, the supporting countries such as Norway, and the private sector. And we need to see these three elements together, both the public development finance, the private sector finance, and the government's role in driving a long-term transition to zero deforestation and enhanced removals. So firstly, on the public and development finance, such as that which is provided by Norway and other countries in the north, need to continue to support capacities for better forest and land use management, for increased transparency, better forest monitoring, and investing in transformational change, and thus build a platform to be able to go further at a global level as well. And these elements are essential also for the policies on the ground that need to happen in forest countries, which we have heard some great examples of in the previous panel. And they're also essential for results-based finance, which can incentivize further action. Secondly, the potential of private sector finance must be put to use, but in the right way. And we see now a paradigm shift happening in the private sector. Increasing numbers of companies are setting science-based climate targets to reduce emissions, not just their own emissions, but emissions in the value chains and also beyond their value chains. And done right, the ambition of the private sector can scale up finance for forests is our conviction. So the biggest initiative recently is the LEAF Coalition, which is a buyer coalition where Norway participates with a number of large companies as well as other countries. And the LEAF Coalition mobilized $1 billion to reduce deforestation in the 2022 to 26 period. This is the largest public-private effort ever assembled to end tropical deforestation. And this finance will be flowing through the purchasing of high-integrity carbon credits, verified and issued through the ART3 standard. And there was large interest in the first call of proposals last year, with over 30 proposals, and the first 5 letters of intent were signed in Glasgow. A new proposal, a new call for proposals has been announced. It will open on the 9th of May and be open until the 15th of September. And we believe it gives an important long-term signal for private sector finance and for forest jurisdictions. A few words about the ART3 standards, which is what ensures the integrity of the emission reductions and removals that will be generated under the LEAF Coalition. This standard drives climate ambition in supplier forest countries through building on successive periods of increased efforts to reduce deforestation. It also has requirements for buyers. They have to have science-based targets and follow through on implementation. So it's not a matter of getting off without making an effort on your own. The purchase of leaf tons is in addition to the science-based emission reduction targets that the companies have. Thirdly, the government's role. The governments play a crucial role through the policies and measures at the national level. This is where the action has to happen. And even with substantial scaling up carbon financing, it will not compensate for the investments investments that we now see in deforestation. And governments are who can do and implement policy changes. That is necessary to address the drivers of deforestation, such as agriculture expansion, illegal activities, mining, to mention a few. And investments in increased productivity, the right in tax incentives, and the rule of law is what can be done by governments. And I think Ecuador, Ghana, and Colombia just explained great examples of doing just that. It requires ownership in ministries of finance and planning departments, as well as the ministries of forest and climate. So despite the somber news from the IPCC, the Global Forest Watch, and others, we think we might be on the brink of really catalyzing forest finance at scale through this interplay between the public finance, development, multilateral finance, private sector, and the government ownership. Thank you.
Thank you. We all know that finance is essential to achieve the Paris Agreement. We know, however, that there is still a financing gap, and then there is also this issue of green versus grey finance. And as a reminder, I mean, a sort of, I'm not exactly sure if it's 11 million or 17 million, but we are somewhat subsidizing the fossil fuel industry at the rate of 11 million or 17 million dollars a minute, every minute. So, Benjamin, you work for one of the largest institutions in terms of financing green for the climate change. How can we scale up green finance and reduce grey, and how can the GCF help?
Thank you very much, Robert. It's a very good question. And we keep hearing about this large gap in finance. We heard this morning that there's, between 2010 and 2017, $20 billion had been unlocked in green finance for forests. And that might seem impressive until you remember that actually during that same period, almost 40 times that amount went into so-called grey finance. So finance mainly for the drivers of deforestation. Now, we know full well that public finance won't be able to close that gap alone. And Karina pointed this out very eloquently. So we basically have two options. Either we take a chunk of this grey finance and steer it towards the green. Okay, so that's what we do with efforts on addressing deforestation-free commodities. And so the GCF is developing its portfolio in that direction. We're addressing that as a key priority. The other option is simply to crowd in new private finance to tilt the balance in favor of green finance. And it's the second one that I wanted to focus on today. In particular, because we have two major opportunities that have emerged in the past few years. The first one is voluntary carbon markets. Last year, we saw a very rapid growth. They reached $1 billion worth for the first time in November last year. And estimates are putting the growth at around 100 times between 2021 and 2050. So there's a lot of potential there, there's a lot of very promising potential. And in fact, REDD+ has so far secured the lion's share of this growth. REDD+ carbon credits grew 280% last year alone. And then at the same time, there have been very fast developments with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which opens a door for carbon markets, compliance of carbon markets at international level. We know that at COP26, for example, there were much further developments in terms of detailing Articles 2.6 and 6.2 and 6.4 in particular. And so both the voluntary and these compliance markets represent tremendous opportunities for unlocking private finance. So what is the GCF doing about that? So the GCF has been specifically designed to use scarce public finance to unlock private finance at scale. We have a high risk appetite. We're not scared to de-risk projects in frontier markets, in challenging ecosystems, and we have a variety of financial instruments for that, not only grants, but also loans, equity, and guarantees. And so currently, we're systematically exploring the potential in each project to access finance from carbon markets, whether they be compliant or voluntary. And this is where the GCF's REDD+ strategy comes in. Our REDD+ strategy is a building block, is conducive to this strategy of unlocking private finance at scale. We're looking at, we've been financing REDD+ at 3 levels, through its 3 phases. Phase 1, in terms of readiness, we've already unlocked $12 million, mainly through our dedicated readiness window to support countries in achieving REDD+ readiness by UNFCCC standards, so using the Warsaw Framework. But we're also helping countries go that step further, because voluntary carbon markets in particular are very demanding. They're not so much interested at UNFCCC standards. They want carbon credits that go to the greater level, to the higher level, for example, the Archery standard, which we've already heard about. And this is much more ambitious. So we're helping these countries go that extra step in terms of readiness. In terms of phase 2, REDD+ implementation, that's very much the bread and butter of the GCF's work. In forests and land use, we finance emissions reductions in deforestation, coming from deforestation and forest degradation. So that's what we do, and at the same time, many of these projects have the capacity to generate high-quality carbon credits, which can then be traded in voluntary or compliance markets. And then we've been financing phase 3 of REDD+ results-based payments through our pilot program. And what's been interesting is that we've seen it in a number of countries, and Ecuador was one good example that we heard about. Costa Rica is another. The countries that have been receiving these results-based payments are reallocating, reinvesting them, and using them as a stepping stone, in many cases, to actually unlock private finance through carbon markets. And Costa Rica is an example at hand where they have reinvested the proceeds from the results-based payments from the GCF into a mechanism to help landowners, many of which are indigenous communities, landowners transfer the rights to carbon revenues to the government so that the government can pool them together. And this is a necessary step to accessing, for example, financing from the LEAF Coalition using the Archery standard. Thank you very much.
Merci, Benjamin. I think we will continue in this vein. Martin, who is online, yes. You hear us? Can you speak so we can see we hear you?
Sí, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes.
Okay. Martin, countries receiving result-based payment will be particularly interested in learning how Argentina is making the important connection from the nation to the local beneficiary. And could you share with us how the RBP fund linked to the national funds or the forest law and the important beneficiaring mechanism we developed and agreed with the province? The floor is yours.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for the invitation. In our country, Argentina, we have begun from 2007 the effort to legislate the Forest Protection Act. So the law has been in place since 2007. Especially, this is a law that is very much closely related to the livestock industry. I said that the law was legislated back in 2007. The Forest Act is related to the conservation and restoration of forest. And it is also closely linked to the management or the governance, and also related to the National Fund, and equally related to the compensation structure. So there's also close relations between the forest services and the forest managers and owners. We have calculated the cost that it takes to conserve the forests. And for about 300 million hectares, we have come up with the cost of conservation of the forest. And about 19% of our national land, which is forest, that area has been set aside for the compensation structure. And Argentina is not only pursuing the results-based payment system, but also at the same time, we're making effort to legislate relevant laws such as Forest Act. And starting from 2018, the federal government is working to strengthen a network which considers various technical aspects, which is connected to the UN REDD+, the third edition of the report. So the project related to UN REDD+ is underway actively. This is also being carried out in partnership with FAO. As I mentioned before, we have established the Forest Act, which is used as a basis for the implementation of the REDD+ project, which is tapping into the fund worth about $82 million. We're doing this because of the important contribution that it can make to mitigating climate change impact. Also, our country, Argentina, in terms of forest development or recognizing the value of forest, we are trying to manage the forest in a way that will contribute to sustainable development of the country. And we're trying to transform forestry related industry into added value industry. That is one of the approaches that we're taking to forest management. And we are also developing forestry from the point of community engagement. We're very much focused on coming up with a comprehensive and broad-based forest management scheme or structure. And we also believe in the importance of prevention in relation to deforestation. And such preventive efforts are being undertaken at a national level. There are also various monitoring programs in place to better manage our forest. And also at a federal government level of Argentina, we're also going all out to strengthen our institutional aspects. And again, we're making various efforts to stop deforestation of the country. Now, going back to the issue of results-based payment, we have a fund that is being operated, and we also want to make sure that there is a fair distribution and allocation. In order to ensure that we have been making effort to strengthen the elements of various projects. And the fund is being used for making our traditional forest stronger and more robust. There are various factors that have to be considered. For example, we have to look at the community engagement, and there are various parameters that we're operating for forest management. And these parameters are being used to ensure an efficient and effective utilization of the fund. And I want to take an example of how the broad-based approach that we're taking for forest management and governance. Again, we understand the importance of efficient distribution and allocation of the compensation. That is why we're resorting to the Forest Act that was legislated before. And we have been able to halt deforestation to a certain extent. And we were able to also bolster productive forest management and also better meet social needs related to forest management. And also from the point of social production for the country as a whole, we're trying to explore various solutions that would be workable in collaboration with rural communities.
It's 4 a.m. in Argentina.
Wow.
Now we are moving from Argentina to Indonesia, and Indonesia is an heavyweight forestry country and has been in the forefront of many forest action and the international dialogue on forest. This year, Indonesia is also the president of the G20 and the co-chair of the FACT dialogue. We have here the ambassador of Indonesia to the Republic of Korea. And Bapak Sulistianto, can you tell us how Indonesia is realizing domestic and international action to reduce deforestation impact and related carbon emission?
Okay, thank you. Excellencies and distinguished guests, delegates, it brings me a great pleasure to be present at this high-level panel discussion to discuss this important issue. Turning to the question raised by the moderator, Mr. Nasi, allow me to respond by reading out the statement prepared by the Minister of Environment and Forestry of the Republic of Indonesia for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies and distinguished delegates, I thank you for the invitation to share our thoughts in this forum. As we all might be aware that in developing country with a high population density such as Indonesia, the need for land utilization has the potential to suppress the existence of forests, which lead to deforestation. The main challenge is how to manage natural resource and meet development needs while minimizing deforestation as low as possible and an effort to achieve sustainability. In this regard, while aiming to accelerate the country's national emission reduction, Indonesia has initiated what we call Forest and Other Land Uses, or FOLU, Net Sink 2030. An approach and strategy where by 2030, the absorption level of FOLU sectors is already balanced or higher than the emission level. After 2030, Indonesian FOLU sector is targeted to be able to absorb GHG along with GHG emission reduction from energy transition or decarbonization, as well as exploration activities in other sectors, including the agricultural sectors, to achieve net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. The agenda for FOLU Net Sink 2030 already has the legal basis as regulated in the presidential decree in 2021, and in more detail has been stipulated last February by namely the ministerial decree on the operational plan for FOLU Net Sink 2030. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, Indonesia is of the view that to deal with deforestation, a concrete simultaneous and systematic effort from local to global levels, and from within and outside the forestry sectors, notably transforming agriculture and food systems, ensuring and promoting sustainable and legal supply chain is already paramount. On that note, within Indonesia G20 presidency, the environment and forestry sector had already held the first environment deputies meetings and climate sustainability working group meeting on March 2022, in which that, among others, there a priority agenda to promote sustainable and environmentally sound economic development by maximizing the co-benefit of the post-COVID-19 recovery program and the achievement of sustainable development goals. In Indonesia, this agenda has been realized through the implementation of social forestry, that is one of the activities within the Indonesian FOLU Net Sink 2030, and has become a national priority program. Social forestry is aimed to sustainable managed forests for local community, or we call in Indonesia adat or customary, community groups, welfare, including through agroforestry, where people obtain income generation from forest products, agricultural intercropping and plantations. Within more than 4 million hectares of social forestry license awarded so far, food is grown on about 300,000 of those hectares across the country's provinces. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I would like to reaffirm that the continuously increased need for forest resources and cultivated land require a solution in forest management to reduce land conservation and trigger deforestation and realizing sustainable land use. Hence, along with the agenda of Indonesian Folu Net Sinks 2030, our commitment to implement social forestry for the sake of community welfare and to maintain the balance of nature, especially maintaining the country's biodiversity and forest cover, will be back-to-back working and strongly implemented. As the presidents of G20 for 2022, Indonesia encouraged the active role of various sectors simultaneously to form concrete action for the need of the present without compromising the needs of future generation, while maintaining the continuity of the supporting and carrying capacities of the environment for environmental and climate protection. I thank you.
Terima kasih, Yulianto.
Thank you.
Now, COP27 this year will be in Egypt, and we have the chance to have Dr. Abosena here. And Dr. Abosena, at the start of the panel, Karin talked about the Glasgow Declaration. Can you tell us how the COP26 that are pledged on forest can be put to scale to the lead to the COP27? And how do you see the forest and climate agenda for Africa in terms of both mitigation and adaptation? And what could be done concretely to scale that up? All that in 6 minutes.
Okay.
Not the means.
And the last one, the most challenging issue for me. But first, thank you very much for inviting us for this important session. And also, I would like to extend also thanks to the Republic of Korea for hosting the Congress this year. Indeed, it's a very important question, and I would like to start as a roadmap from Galaxo to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Egypt presidency of COP27 will build on what have been accomplished in Galaxo and capitalize on the momentum to ensure balanced progress across all negotiation tracks. That's what we would like to ensure. So, in fact, forests are one of the most important ecosystem for combating climate change. And as a result for this fact, the world leaders gathered in Galaxo have come to consensus on, have come to a consensus on what we can call a declaration for a Galaxo leader declaration on forests and land use. This is why, in order to conserve forests, avoid actions that lead to deforestation and land degradation, and enable sustainable management for our global forests. And also this will be achieved through increasing the access to investment and improve the effectiveness and accessibility of the resources. This is a very important issue and priority for us, have been taken as a task for us to COP27. In addition to this objective, it is very important to link this global objective to the access to the appropriate finance that would maintain our global forces, as we call it, the green lungs for our world. So the global forest finance pledges, as well as other forest-related pledges announced in Galaxo, to fund the protection, restoration, and sustainable management of forests can be scaled up by involving more partners from various fields, ensuring that such commitments are met and demonstrating to global community that progress has been made on the ground. must be our focus during COP27, which are referred to as the COP of implementation. This is a very important slogan we have already agreed right now to be our slogan in the COP27 this year in Egypt. COP for implementation, together for implementation. Coming to the African countries, which are, Egypt was nominated by African countries to be the presidency for the COP27. So we are representing, by say, the African countries and even also the developing countries. So we are working on priority for initiating ecosystem initiatives to protect and restore and best management of the global forests. This is actually with special focus on certain regions which are hardly affected by the climate change, like the African countries. So the African Great Green Wall, which intends to rehabilitate 100 million hectares of existing damaged land by 2030, this will capture around 250 million tons of carbon and create 10 million employment in rural regions, in an example of African success efforts. It provides a climate change barrier across the Sahel region, which was with plans to replicate in other parts of Africa. This would be a very important initiative, and success story could be replicated in other regions. So we'd like to have it as a success at the ground. So to improve action on the ground, global assistance and collaboration are required. It's a must. As an African country, Egypt, improving access to finance and enough finance and sustainable finance, and this is what we are always calling how we can do the balance between the finance for adaptation and finance for mitigation. It's a very crucial issue for the developing country, as most of the developing countries are affected countries by climate change. They are not affecting countries, but by the end we are all affected by climate change. So access for reasonable finance is a very crucial issue, and actually this is one of the top priorities for the COP27 related to the climate finance, sustainable climate finance, adaptations, and balance between adaptation and mitigations is also one of the priority. With this, I would like to also, we hope that to invite all of you to be with us this year in the COP27, as Egypt presidency is looking forward to host all the countries and come together with a consensus for implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So let's give a big round of applause to all our panelists. Second panel. So can I ask you to go back to the and last but not least, we will have the point of view of the host country, and we have the pleasure of having Dr. Yoon Park, the president of the National Institute of Forest Science of the Republic of Korea, that is going to tell us the Korea experience on restoration REDD+ project and its goal of cooperation on UN REDD. Dr. Park.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hyun Park, the president of the National Institute of Forest Science. Okay, I'm so honored to participate in this significant and vital place to discuss the prevention of forest degradation. Because of lack of time, I'm gonna give you just a brief 3 opinions, 2 personal and 1 as the representative of Korean government. When I was working on issues related to REDD Plus or did research on ODA, I realized that the forest and forest conservation are not the ones that really matter. We need to focus on people rather than forest itself. I would say that FAO is doing quite well at encouraging people to participate in actively by setting up a frame named the Forest and Landscape Restoration rather than just forest restoration. When I mention landscape, it means all components concerning on productivity, including human beings. The Republic of Korea is praised as a model country for its success in forest rehabilitation because we considered people along with planting trees as well. Ensuring the success of REDD Plus or REDD, it is crucial to allow local people to agree on their activity and be actively involved. Instead of preserving the forest, a realistic compensation should be rewarded for better quality of life for the indigenous people. In connection, I would say that a proper method to help people's lives better should be provided. As of my understanding, the biggest reason that REDD Plus is not progressively implemented, although you are saying that it is going well, they are locked in result-based payment frame. Current activities should be incentivized and encouraged rather than rewarded once project finishes. An adequate level of investment should be involved to attract indigenous people or countries can actively participate. In this sense, I would suggest Mr. Benjamin Singer from GCF or some of the funding instruments. Why don't you add phase 4 for this kind of one? Not just for result-based payment, but why don't you give them some kind of funding for incentivizing the progressive active? Let me add one more thing as the representative of Korean government. In line with the global changes in the environment, the Republic of Korea plans to develop and provide the revised UN REDD Plus educational curriculum and materials that reflect the new rules of the Paris Agreement, Glasgow Leadership Declaration on Forest and Land Use, and Global Forest Finance Pledge. The current UN REDD Plus educational curriculum and materials were produced in 2016 and emphasized the preparation and implementation of REDD Plus. Now is the time to improve and supplement the curriculum in accordance with the global changes in the environment surrounding REDD Plus. The Republic of Korea is preparing to offer production support for a revised REDD Plus educational curriculum and materials that focus on the implementation beyond the existing Warsaw framework for REDD Plus, which focus on just the preparation. Republic of Korea is also planning to develop and operate a capacity building platform of REDD Plus that actively utilize Korea's forest restoration experiences, multiple failures, and successful experience to overcome them. Furthermore, various supportive plans are underway, such as online education and hosting networking events utilizing webinars. the Republic of Korea is vigorously cooperating with the UN Red Plus program that has built fruitful knowledge and experience, and to support the capacity building platform of Red Plus from the international community since 2008. We clearly understand that forest is the source of life, and saving forests is the way to solve climate change, climate challenges, and save the earth. However, this should not only be done by the one country, but also be accompanied by global solidarity and cooperation. Primarily, it demands actively sharing the experience of failure and not repeating the same failure. The Republic of Korea will take the lead in such cooperation, and we look forward to your cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Park. We are reaching the end of this session. A bit late, my apologies for the colleagues that come late, but I think that we have listened to very interesting points, and I hope that that has been a very good teaser for all of you to continue attending the events related to this sub-team. And more than that, be convinced that we can do something about forest, about reducing deforestation, halting forest loss, if we want to do it, if we put our priority right, and if we work collectively and help each other. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the people that were in the room. Thank you to the people online. And I wish you a very good World Forestry Congress.
Good evening, everyone. The Landscape Partnership Asia event is about to begin. May we kindly request the delegates and representatives from the previous session to make your way to leave the hall if you are not participating in the Landscape Partnership Asia event. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. We will begin the event in 5 minutes' time. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin in a minute. Please take your seats. All right, it seems like all you are set now, and as it's already an appointed time, we will commence the event now. So good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the official launch of Landscape Partnership Asia, restoring dry land and drought-prone areas. My name is Han Young-ju of the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here to Seoul. And I extend my warmest welcome to all the online participants around the world. I'm honored to be your MC at this momentous chapter in the history of our region. And before we proceed, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to the guests for your presence, both online and offline. We are joined by 4 founding partners of LPA, AFOCO, the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, and the Global Evergreening Alliance. And we have many more honorable representatives and participants from government officials, the private sector, and international organizations across Asia. Thank you for your participation again, and we ask for your understanding that we are not able to introduce all our guests due to the time constraints. So now, to kick off the opening sessions, I'd like to invite His Excellency Mr. Choi Byung-am, Minister of Korea Forest Service, to make the opening remarks.
네, 여러분 반갑습니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great to meet you all. It is indeed a great pleasure to meet you all again after the plenary. This is Choi Byung-am, Minister of the Korea Forest Service. Now, first of all, I would like to speak on behalf of the host country of the World Forestry Congress in thanking all the participants at this LPA event, and especially the joint founding partners, Mr. Robert Nasi from C4 and Chris Armitage, the CEO of GA. I would like to thank you very much for your participation today. And also the co-founder of the LPA, and also those who took part in the preparation of this event, Mr. Ricardo Calderon, Executive Director of AFOCO. Thank you very much for your efforts. Now, this morning, we started out with the opening ceremony, opening up the 15th World Forestry Congress. And at this Congress, for the first time in 44 years, now this is actually being hosted for the first time in Asia-Pacific countries in 44 years. And we have about 12,500 participants registered from over 140 countries. And I would say that this is going to be one of the most successful congresses ever held. Now, in particular, at this Congress, for this Landscape Partnership Asia, for this to be formally launched is all the more a great pleasure for me. So I would like to deeply congratulate the launch of the LPA. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Drylands and drought-prone areas account for 46% of the total terrestrial area, and of them, 90% is distributed in developing countries. As such, globally, there is the Bonn Challenge, and then also the UN Climate Action and the UNCCD dryland greening projects. In other words, there are many movements, actions, and initiatives to fight against these phenomenon. And also, among the global dryland area, Asian region takes up about 30%. So the drylands and also the deforestation, now they not only damage the forest, but they also deprive the livelihood of over 2.5 billion people who rely on forest services. And this also means that restoring the drylands in Asia, where it is the largest, is indeed an urgent matter. And also greening the drylands would also be a key project in increasing the green area throughout the world, which would also be one of the keys to overcoming the climate crisis as well as the current supply chain issues. Now, the country of Korea is, I would say, the leading example of successful restoration from damaged areas. After the Korean War, so to be more specific, from 1973, we were able to plant over 10 billion trees to overcome forest degradation. In terms of per capita, so in Korea we have over 50 million in population, and in terms of per capita, this means that it was over 200 trees per person. In particular, throughout the nation, we have had the nationwide movement to plant trees. So that was in the 1970s, and at that time, actually, the Korean per capita GDP was less than $500, meaning that Korea was really not well off. We lacked technology, we lacked capital. Still, Korea went on the way of forestation, and the key to this was the nationwide people's aspiration for greening the nation, and also the practice that followed, meaning that everyone, all the members in the population, they all took action to take part in planting trees and afforestation of the country. Now then, based on the success case of Korea, then for the Asian countries that are much better off than Korea then would be able to address the issues of the dry lands in Asia if they had the will. Now, in addressing the climate change and also to prevent desertification, global cooperation has become more important than ever before, and the fact that AFOCO is now implementing the initiative to restore dry lands and drought-prone areas is timely and very important indeed, and it is also well in line with the AFOCO's founding mission. As a member country to AFOCO, Korea is an active supporter of these initiatives. And the LPA Secretariat, I understand that there are discussions underway to having the LPA Secretariat in AFOCO. Now, AFOCO is rich in experience in forest restoration across Asia. So based on this know-how, I do believe that it will also be able to play an important role in restoring drylands and drought-prone areas. Now, the greening of the drylands would be the most important and urgent issue among the forest issues of Asia. And I do hope that through the occasion today, Asia region can take the leadership in restoring forests. In particular, I do hope that we can have in-depth discussions on how to restore drylands at this very site. Once again, I would like to congratulate the launch of the LPA, and I do hope that together with AFOCO, the founding partners will be able to identify new financing sources and also identify and actively take part in related projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now is the group photo time, so please, could all the speakers please make your way to the front? For those of you who are joining us online, please turn on your camera. Thank you for your cooperation, and please return to your seats for viewing the LPA video.
There are more degraded drylands in Asia than anywhere else in the world. The continuing degradation of these landscapes has enormous environmental, social, and economic implications. To restore drylands, improve livelihoods, and support national and international goals for sustainable development in the region, we need a targeted initiative at a scale that has never been seen before. Landscape Partnership Asia is that ambitious initiative. It is the largest restoration program across Asia, with the initial aim of restoring 10 million hectares of degraded forests and agricultural lands in Central, East, South, and Southeast Asia by 2032. The partnership is a collaboration initiated by its 4 founders: Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, and the Global Evergreening Alliance. Jointly with other partners, our efforts will mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis, build the resilience of forests, rangelands, and agricultural landscapes, and improve livelihoods within the next 10 years and beyond. Join us. Together, we can restore drylands and drought-prone areas across Asia for a better future.
I hope you enjoyed the video and got to know more about the LPA. And next, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I invite Dr. Paola Agostini, the lead natural resources specialist with the World Bank, calling in online at a very early hour in Washington, D.C. She'll speak to us on the significance of restoring degraded lands across Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Agostini with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here with you at the launch of this very important partnership. It's exciting to see the video that you just showed. So thank you very much. You know, I've been working for more than 25 years on landscape restoration, and seeing all this partnership happening, it's really gives a lot of hope. But now let me focus on my presentation to give you a sense of what we are doing in Central Asia. Next slide, please. I was in Tashkent in November in Uzbekistan, and that's what I saw from outside the windows of my hotel. At the beginning, I thought it was fog, and then we went outside and the car were full of dust. This is an event that never happened before in Tashkent, in the capital of Uzbekistan. But it's just that it became evident to everyone in every newspaper, in every television moment, why you need landscape restoration. Next slide. At the same time, just a month ago, in the mountains part of Uzbekistan, you had this kind of event. You know, mud flow, rivers of muds going through every time it rains through these mountains. So next one, next slides. So all in a sudden, really, people are starting to understand that all these disasters have a huge economic impact. This is a studies that we have done at the World Bank that tells you what are the impacts of sand and dust storms in Central Asia, with specific focus on the Aral Sea and linking the effects of the sand and dust storm mainly to the health of the people and to the agriculture productivity. So the economic cost in terms of the impact on health, of the impact on agriculture productivity and the impact on infrastructure are really big. Next slide. So this is why we started considering, you know, what's the status of land degradation in Central Asia. And this is on your left is a map of the hotspots of land degradation in Central Asia that, as you can see, are mainly on the borders of the countries. And we did also trying to understand what's the impact, the economic cost, and the economic of land degradation a few years ago has shown that at least 4% of the GDP of these countries is affected by the cost of inaction. And this is just a very conservative estimate. So next slide. This is where we decided with the World Bank and our Central Asia partners, countries, to focus on corridors in Central Asia, transboundary corridors, because the hotspots of land degradation are on transboundary corridor. Next slide. And here it is, we designed a program called Resilient Landscape Restoration Program, that we call in short RESILAND, which covers 4 countries. It's an umbrella program, and you have 4 national projects. 2 projects have already been approved by our board, one in Kazakhstan and one in Tajikistan. We are working with Uzbekistan. We should go to the board in May or beginning of June. And Kyrgyz is under preparation. And hopefully in the future, Afghanistan will be able again to join us in the future. We are not doing this by ourselves. We have a lot of partners. This is part of the Bond Challenge, if you want, through the ECA 30 partnership, and I hope very soon also of a landscape partnership for Asia. And it's really sort of incredible to see the commitment of all these countries. But let me give you just an example from Uzbekistan, so we understand better the work that we are doing with our partners. Next slide. This is the project development objective of the Uzbekistan projects, but all the countries are very similar with a different entry point. And what I want to say is that the objective, yes, it is to increase the area under sustainable landscape management, but it's a very, the focus is very much on productive landscape restoration. Restoring the lands, not just for, bringing into a better health, but also to make it more productive, to help both the environmental services, but also the communities and the livelihood of the people that live there. This is why I wanted to open this wonderful picture of all the fruit and the nuts and the pistachio that you can get from Central Asia, which is almost the place of origins of many of the fruits that we eat all over the world. So next slide. This is just an image of Uzbekistan, or on your left, you have the hotspots of land degradation, and on the right, the poverty map. So the project, you have a correlation, if you want, between the degradation and the poverty. And the project that we will implement together with the State Forest Committee of Uzbekistan decided to focus not on the most degraded land, but on the land where you have the most opportunities for restoration. Next slide. So these are the focus area where you have a red diamond, all along the borders of Uzbekistan with Kyrgyz, with Tajikistan, with Afghanistan. And maybe once we demonstrate there the impact of landscape restoration that is really going to restore, to heal a very degraded land, then we can expand it to other countries. And you can see in the bottom, I'm particularly proud that we have as a partner working with us, the Korea, the examples of what the Korea Forest Services and Korea has done in terms of restoration has been an eye-opener for me and for many of my colleagues. And so they are helping us, and we have Korea Trust Fund money as well. They are helping us to really work in Uzbekistan. In particular, you will see later with the ICT platforms. But I want to recognize the important role that Korea Forest Services has in this program in Uzbekistan and in Central Asia. Next slide. Those are some of the criteria I was telling you as we selected the project area. So it's really focusing on the highest opportunity for productive restoration. But it also looks at where do you have a protected areas, because the protected areas are like the backbones of where you can produce environmental services. So when you look at the landscape approach, we want to connect different lands, and the protected area is an important core asset in the landscape. And then you collect the degraded land, connect degraded lands, agricultural land, all into corridors that become our transboundary corridors where we will focus our intervention. Next slide. These are the components of the projects. You always need to have a strong policy component. You cannot, have a policy that goes against landscape restoration or subsidies that favor, a kind of grazing that maybe degrade the land. So a stronger focus on policy, a strong focus on making the State Forest Committee a state-of-the-art organization that can monitor and manage its landscape and its forests, so a strong component on ICT platform, the regional collaboration, because I was telling you the issues are at the borders, and so you have a fire management that needs to be done with protocols that are similar, or you have to manage certain biodiversity that moves along this transboundary corridor together. So it also, this project helps this collaboration among countries. Then we have a second component, which is really the core of the program, which is about restoring in a productive way the landscape. But it's also trying to give to the communities that live around where they are an opportunities to make a livelihood out of the natural resources that are being restored. And so we are trying to make the people to give some training and some small grants, matching grants, so they can become small micro entrepreneurs using the natural resource products. And they can go from beekeeping to capers to pistachio nuts. So instead of only using it for subsistence or for selling it just at the local market, try to make a little bit of a value addition in the jump and looking at certification and the possibility to even export these wonderful products that Uzbekistan has. And so they will value more their land and their natural resources. And then the third component, it's about protected areas and tourism. Again, as I was telling you, in the design of our corridors, protected areas are a key element because of the environmental services they provide. But ecotourism is an important economic instrument to really value them. And Uzbekistan and Central Asia in general has so much to offer because of the cultural aspects that are present, and so combining the cultural aspects with the ecotourism aspects and the gastronomy that you find in these countries, it's certainly a winning strategy. So this is a little bit about the structure of the program. Next slide. Just to show to you, you cannot, the first thing we're going to do that is to have a forest inventory in Uzbekistan. It's not there, and it's based on the idea that you don't value what you don't measure. The first most important things to do is to know what's there and to keep monitoring it. So forest inventory. Next slide. But the second one, and this slide is taken from the presentation of the Korea Forest Services. So thank you very much. Just to illustrate what an ICT platform can do. It's really to make sure that the Forest Committee becomes a modern, state-of-the-art organization where all the things are online on the same ICT platform. So we are going to invest together with the Korean trust funds, 2 Korean trust funds that we have, and with the help of the Korea Forest Services into this ICT platform. Thank you so much, Korea, for really bringing your knowledge to Central Asia. Next. These are just the productive component. As you can see, just, focusing on introducing certain kind of plantation, a lot of agroforestry, but also because of the desertic nature of Central Asia, we do some water harvesting technique, and then the ecotourism side. Next slide. This is the kind of work we would like to do in protected area. On the right, you see a canyon in Zamin Park, in a beautiful park in Uzbekistan, but at the moment does not have infrastructure to enjoy the park. It has hotels, it has sanatorium, but is missing the trails. So what the project will invest on are these kind of trails that you can see on the left. Next. These are the kind, again, of investment that we do. Next. The key project results. So it's not only about land area under sustainable landscape management, but it's also about people benefiting. We are going to create programs for jobs, for employment creation in doing this restoration based on the example of the Conservation Corps that was done many years ago in the US, and the tourism infrastructure that needs to be there. Next. These are the kind of long-term benefits that these programs in Central Asia, this resilient program, will bring. So it's resilience of the landscape, resilience of the infrastructures, and resilience of the people, and the vibrant economy in this region. Last slide. And this is kind of a dream I want to leave you with. So degraded land first, and in 20 years maybe, or maybe less, a land that is healed, a land that provides a lot of benefits, a land that contributes to the many SDGs that are there. So 3 elements that are important: work on policy, work on partnership like the ones we are launching today, invest in the natural capital. So these are the key essential elements for any landscape restoration program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Agostini. Now, let me invite the founding partners to speak, and we'll go in alphabetical order, starting with the Executive Director of AFOCO, Mr. Ricardo Calderon. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to formally introduce the partnership, the Landscape Partnership Asia. Landscape Partnership Asia is an evolving multi-stakeholder platform that seeks to implement performance-based investments in restoring Asian drylands and drought-prone areas. The partnership will involve a variety of partners, ranging from public through private to civil society. It will seek the commitment of funding from implementing technical and political partners to mobilize resources. Under the LPA, together with our founding partner, the Global Evergreening Alliance, C4ECRAP, AFOCO has a dual role of founding partner and secretariat of the partnership. By 2032, LPA envisions to realize the national dryland restoration efforts are substantially enhanced, with large areas brought under integrated dryland and drought management to a minimum of 10 million hectares from the baseline. Training and capacity building at various levels will be the backbone for fostering the achievement of the partnership's vision. Enabling policies will be encouraged where needed to secure investments in restoration. Restoration goals will align with national and international commitments that shall be quantified based on the investment and impact through achievement in land degradation neutrality targets, landscape carbon capture, biodiversity enhancement, bioenergy development, increased nutritious food production, and improved livelihoods. Specifically, the LPA activities are grouped to 6 key areas. 1, establishment of baselines and expansion of the scale of proven restoration approaches. 2nd, training and capacity building. 3rd, expand the scale of financial mechanisms and support to small to medium-sized enterprises. 4th, operationalization of small grant scheme to assess financial and mainstreaming mechanism. 5th, support to enabling policy and mainstreaming, and knowledge and management and monitoring and evaluation. Through the LPA, the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, as a formal regional intergovernmental body, is committed to providing the bridge in order to enhance cross-sectoral cooperation, broaden coordination and coherence among member countries, partner countries, and organizations on the sustainable management of forests for the continuous production of economic and ecosystem services, biodiversity conservation, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Calderon, for introducing the LPA in details. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Chris Armitage, Chief Executive Officer of the Global Evergreening Alliance, and he will share with us his thoughts on scaling up restoration and uniting diverse sectors. Please give him a big round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and distinguished guests, I'd like us all to think for a moment about the purpose of the Landscape Partnership Asia. to facilitate the restoration of at least 10 million hectares of degraded land across the drylands and drought-prone areas of Asia by the year 2030. That's an extremely heavy lift, and it's going to require a truly collaborative effort to scale up existing land restoration initiatives. In recent years, we've seen some incredible successes across Asia, but most of the large-scale investments have focused on REDD+, or avoided deforestation and sustainable forest management. By comparison, land restoration projects have been relatively small and fragmented, especially in drylands and drought-prone areas. To deliver the sort of sustainable or transformative impact that vulnerable rural communities require, these scattered pilots need to be scaled up and out, and to contribute meaningfully to mitigating the impacts of climate change even more so. But scaling up from a land restoration pilot doesn't usually just mean simply doing the same things over a larger area, and certainly not if we want to ensure sustainable, positive change. We need to look at the systems that impact and are impacted by restoration practices, and we need to do this at a landscape level. We need to consider the cultural context across diverse groups, other actors that are impacted, local markets and value chains, opportunity costs and incentives for landholders and land managers, and the policy environment in the interests of government stakeholders, to name just a few. Further, we need to leverage the knowledge and the experience of all key stakeholders, including research and technical organisations, environmental NGOs, and development-focused NGOs, and we need to build on existing trusting relationships and buy-in from communities. If this sounds complex, it's because it is, especially when you consider that most organisations that work with community-driven land restoration compete for the same grant funding on a daily basis. And this is precisely why the Global Evergreening Alliance was created, to coordinate the collaborative design and implementation of massive-scale land restoration programs. And it's why AFOCO, C4ICRAF, and the Global Evergreening Alliance came together as founding members of the LPA, to ensure these efforts are aligned and developed with governments across the region and informed by the most robust scientific evidence. But it goes without saying that large-scale projects require large-scale resources. We've all been hearing for years that we can't rely on grant funding to address global challenges, such as land degradation and climate change. There simply isn't enough public funding to support the scale of action that we need. Instead, I'd suggest that grants should be seen as catalytic funding, used to unlock much larger investments from the private sector. So in recent years, we've significantly changed our focus from raising grant funding to working with the private sector, in particular with large corporate global organisations, which have developed strategies for reducing their carbon footprint and avoiding the emissions to the extent possible, but which also need to offset what can't be avoided or reduced quickly enough. We've analysed the carbon already being sequestered across a diverse range of grant-funded programs and worked together with experienced corporates to develop a robust carbon and financial model, particularly for large-scale private sector investment. But it's worth noting that unlike most carbon models, this isn't designed to maximise carbon. Instead, it's been built around a human development-focused approach that maximises the direct benefits to communities and to the environment. Our land restoration programs are designed with communities to ensure they focus on supporting the adoption of the practices that the landholders actually want, practices that increase the productivity, the reliability and the resilience of their farming systems, and practices that help them participate more equitably in local value chains and markets. And this is important because it ensures ongoing incentives and buy-in from participating landholders, which in turn mitigates risk and ensures the permanence of programs. And these are key considerations for investors. You may have heard an announcement at COP26 about Climate Asset Management's $150 million investment into our Restore Africa program. And that program is being officially launched and starting implementation later this month. But what you may not have heard is that together with AFOCO and C4 ICRAF, and in alignment with our new Landscape Partnership Asia, we're working with several large corporates and national governments, and we're well developed in designing a regional $150 million land restoration program called Restore Southeast Asia. I look forward to sharing the details of this landmark program with you in the days and weeks ahead, and to working together to scale up land restoration across the region under the LPA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Armitage, for your wonderful speech. Actually, we're supposed to have another speaker from C4 ICRAF, who is Dr. Robert Nazi, but he is unable to attend today because he's other schedule, but he sent us a wonderful wishes and best wishes to us. So please understand. And next, let's now listen to responses from partners and friends who have graced this evening with their presence. Let me introduce Mr. Chris Dickinson, Senior Ecosystem and Ecosystem Services Specialist with the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation of the Green Climate Fund. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Dickinson.
Okay, hello. Distinguished gentlemen and ladies today, thank you for coming. It's great to see so many people from around the Asia region, and I hope that everyone has an interesting and successful World Forestry Congress. And first of all, I'd like to thank AFRICO and the LPA Partnership for inviting me to speak today, and just like to make a few comments about the partnership. So first of all, there's been some great presentations so far, and as the previous speakers have said, the dryland forests are very important in the region. It can be one of the solutions for climate change, for land degradation, and for helping with recovery from the COVID pandemic through job creation and income generation. The Green Climate Fund is a very important partner in for countries and private sector in the Asia region. So far globally, we've approved $1.4 billion worth of projects in the forestry and land use area, totaling over $3.2 billion, including the co-finance. And together these will result in over 1 billion tons of CO2 sequestered and benefit 150 million people. There's been some really good projects that have been developed in Asia. For example, there's the GIZ project in Laos, People's Democratic Republic, which is also now looking at developing a second phase. There's the Bhutan Forest for Life project, which is implemented by WWF, which is looking at conservation of upland landscapes to preserve downstream water. There's FAO invested in forests and rangelands in the Kyrgyz Republic, and also a community-based forest management project in Timor-Leste. But there's still potential for a lot more, and we'd like to explore in the future how partnerships can be undertaken with private sector and also the members and countries involved in the Landscape Partnership Asia. Particularly looking forward to trying to develop projects in Central Asia, where we don't have many projects at the moment, and it's been recognized by our board as an area where we're under programming. And in some of the dryland projects that we have developed, also with a lot of political momentum in the Great Green Wall area of Africa, and it would be good if Africa and the countries could also stimulate such a sort of political momentum amongst the Asian countries. For example, at the board meeting in this year, with GCF approved a project with IFAD, which is working in the Great Green Wall to support agriculture, energy and agroforestry. An important part of this is that it's working with local banks And this might be something which the partnership can also look at in the future. Local banks will be there forever. They have mechanisms for providing to entrepreneurs, for small landowners, for processing products. The World Bank project had quite a lot of productive value chains in there, which may also benefit from investments in the supply chain. So this might also be a stakeholder to think of in the future. And so we also have sector guides in English, French and Spanish, which have been put on the GCF website, I think this week. The French and Spanish ones will be announced. We have sector guides in agriculture, forestry, land use and ecosystems, which can also help our partners develop projects and concept notes for operation in climate change issues. GCF is also still supporting RED+ strategies around the world, and this we also see is important for long-term financing, both through RED+ or through voluntary carbon markets. And we must also emphasize the win-win potential of forests for livelihoods, for downstream water, for ecosystem services, and also for preserving biodiversity. And also, especially in the drought-prone areas where we need perhaps more interventions, and the technical support of partners such as AFRICO and CIFOR and ECROF will be very helpful in making this partnership really thrive and develop in the future. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you for welcoming me today. And okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. And now let us hear from Dr. Eun-sik Park, Director General of the International Affairs Bureau of the Korea Forest Service. Please give him a big hand.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Eun-sik Park. I'm a Director General of the Korea Forest Service, and also I'm working for the Secretary General for the 15th World Forest Congress Secretariat. I'm very, first of all, on behalf of the Korea Forest Service and Secretariat, thank you very much for you joining us this wonderful Congress, and then with you, the Congress is kind of the very successful Congress, I believe. Thank you. Actually, due to the time constraint, I'd like to skip the most part, but I'd like to share the Korea's experience because, you know, our previous presenter, the Dr. Agostini, shared some Korea's case. So I think I'd like to provide more opportunity to think about the Korea's story more. This is my presentations, and let me allow to start the emphasizing the forest function. So absolutely, the forest is very important resources on the globe to tackle the climate crisis and solve the biodiversity loss and desertification. But unfortunately, forest covers only 31% of the land area. But this is huge, but we can, when we think about the size of the dry land, which is the 41% of the land area. So it was remarkable because the forest size of the forest land area is smaller than the dry land. As you are well aware, the last year, the more than 141 leaders support the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use to stop the deforestation. I'd like to think about, I share the Korea's forest restoration stories. This is my, usually I start with my discussion. So can economic growth and environmental improvement go together? The most people say, maybe in their mind, they have negative answers, but the Korea's story says yes. So I brought two pictures, exactly same place. The left one is the 1950s, right one is the 2020 is now. So we call it Cheonggyecheon small stream running through the downtown area of the Seoul city. Maybe if you go into the Gyeongbok Palace, maybe you can visit this site. The right after the Korean War in 1950s, Korea's economy and the environment were in a state of the extremely devastated. However, within just a half of a century, Korea achieved a dramatic economic growth and environmental recovery at the same time. Maybe you can see some numbers. Maybe as my minister already explained in the opening ceremony, the 1950s, Korea is one of the poorest country. Actually, he said among the 120 member states in FAO, we are the 119. But today, we became one member of the OECD members, and also the stand volume per hectare reached to 165. So, yeah, I'd like to explain a little bit about the story. Actually, Korea initiated the National Forest Restoration Project in 1960s by establishing the Korea Forest Service and Forest Law. In particular, by moving and improving the livelihood of the slash and burning farmers, we reduced the deforestation caused by slash and burn and promoted reforestation. Through 6 national forest plan, Korea carried out a successful forest restoration and sustainable forest management, which allowed Korea's citizens to enjoy various benefits of forest now. As you can see, it's not an exaggeration to say that the whole nation from public-private sector to organize this remarkable achievement. I brought these 3 photos explaining the process of the reforestation. This is the same place, but we started planting trees, and now we have a wonderful forest. According to the studies, the scientists tells there are 4 major driving forces for successful restoration from 1973 to 1987. The first one is the public participation. Actually, you can see the very small girls, they are elementary school students maybe, they were participating in the planting activities, even they are very young, but all Korean citizens join these planting activities. Second, this is national agenda. The reforestation was adopted as a top priority national agenda, and the president emphasized these things many times. So in the picture, the left side one wearing the white caps is the president at the time. So he visited the planting site and then discussed with the expert. Actually, the guys who holding the shovel is the famous scientist Hyun Shin-gyu. He is the professor of the Seoul National University to develop the new trees. The very good for our weathers or conditions. And third, the policy implementation. As I explained at the time, the Korea Forest Service was established, and then the government introduced many forest protection laws and national forest management plan. Lastly, the economic growth. Economic growth helped this achievement because most people depended on the forest to use the fuel wood, but due to the economic growth, we can replace the fuel wood into the bracket or the coal or the gasoline. So now we have a beautiful forest. The National Institute of Forest Science calculate this value of the ecosystem, and then it is almost the same as the $221 billion and we call every Korean citizen owed $4,280 per year to the forest. Now I'd like to introduce very briefly about the international cooperation of the Forest Service. Absolutely, we have many forest projects with the international cooperation, international organizations and bilateral friends, partners. The first one is we developed the Changwon Initiative with the UNCCD. It is aiming to support the effective implementation of the decision of the UN Convention to combat desertification and DLDD. It started from the 2012. It continued up until now. So through these activities, we developed many scientific activities and evidence-based, the achievement systems. So this is one of the very signature programs for the UNCCD. Next one, actually we have 37 bilateral partner countries, maybe many Central Asian countries and Southeastern Asian countries. And I'd like to introduce some of the projects in our bilateral partners. We have excellency from the Mongolian government. Actually, we have very honored to work with the Mongolian government, and then we start this project from 2007, and it is continuing to up until now. So we have 3 phases. So we successfully finished it to a second phase, and this year we start third phase. And this is some photos of the activities in Mongolian project. We call it Greenbelt project. This is another one we are start recently. This is the Saksaur and pistachio plantation project in Tajikistan. Actually, we try to develop the livelihood for the local people. At the same time, maybe we can reforest the devastated area, so people can increase their incomes, and then they also join us to protect the forest. It started 2019, and we will finish it this year, and then we are considering to scale up this project. This is some photos of the project. Thank you very much. Due to the time constraint, I shared very briefly, but if you have any questions or more information, just stay with us, and maybe the Korea Forest Service can provide more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park Eun-sik. The next talk is from the other representative of the co-host of the Congress, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Mr. Thomas Hofer, Senior Forestry Officer and Team Leader of Forest Resources Management of the Forestry Division. He will now share his insights into the importance of the LPA. Please give him a big hand.
Good evening, colleagues, excellencies, friends. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of that side event for inviting me to be part of this event. And with this, I would like to acknowledge our long-standing collaboration with AFOCO and with the Korea Forest Service. So we have been working together for many years in a very successful way. And thank you so much for all this collaboration, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I was asked to talk about 10 minutes about the importance of national government commitments to restoring land in Asia. Next slide, please. So when I was preparing for, next slide, please. Okay, I can do that myself. Sorry. When I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking a little bit, what are these commitments? Why is it important? And here are a few thoughts which obviously can be expanded. And the first thought is obviously that restoration happens on the ground at national level. I mean, we saw this from previous speakers, from the different examples which were shown. So restoration happens on the ground at national level, and that's why national commitment is essential. Restoration requires collaboration across sectors at national level, overcoming administrative boundaries. So that's a very important topic, although we always talk about collaboration, but in practice this is not always easy. So we have to cross administrative boundaries, we have to cross sectorial boundaries, and that needs a strong commitment, because this is not happening by itself. This is really something we have to invest. That's why this commitment is important. The third one is the participation of local stakeholders is essential. So the commitment is not just at national level, but the commitment needs to go all the way through to the local level to be successful with a restoration. Now, the fourth point is very important. Restoration is not something which happens by itself also at the local level, because it needs incentives. Local people, they need to benefit from restoration. If not, they will not necessarily collaborate, because they are struggling with their daily life, so they need benefits for restoration. So that's why that's another element of the national commitment, to really provide incentives. That can be financial incentives, that can be other type of incentives, access to education, to training, or to tools, whatever it is. Restorations need to be prioritized in national strategies, policy, and resource allocations. That's again a fundamental one. Of course, it's good to have projects, extra budgetary funded projects for restoration, but ultimately for the long-term sustainability, restoration needs to be part of national strategies, budget allocations, etc. And finally, the national commitment needs also to go beyond the boundaries. So the collaboration across countries, exchange of experiences and knowledge are important elements. So these are just a few thoughts when we think about commitments, national commitment for restoration, and why they are important. Now, when I was reflecting on this presentation, I was looking at what are, in fact, in Asia, conducive frameworks, and obviously there are these three programs. There are more, but I just wanted to quote, obviously the global one, the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which has a strong relevance for the region. And then in the middle we have the Regional Strategy and Action Plan of Forest and Landscape Restoration in Asia. I will come to that. This is an Asia-Pacific Forestry Commission framework where all Asia-Pacific forestry member countries have signed, and they are committed. That's again part of the national commitment. And on the right side, obviously, the Landscape Partnership Asia, which is being launched today. I looked also at the institutional framework, and you see here, I should probably mention more. There are all these institutions, and I omitted, I'm sorry for that, the Global Evergreening Alliance here as an institution. But these are all institutions in the region which are, in a way, working on restoration. And most of them, they are driven by member countries. So that means the national commitment is also there in these regional institutions. So if I come very briefly to this Regional Strategy and Action Plan of Forest and Landscape Restoration, this is for me a very, very strong framework which countries are committed to. You see that this was launched, or the preparation was launched at the Asia-Pacific Forestry Week in 2016, and then in Sri Lanka at the 27th session of the Asia-Pacific Forestry Commission, the Asia-Pacific Forestry Commission endorsed that document. So this is a document which really calls for national commitment for restoration, obviously with the focus on forests, but much more broadly on landscapes. Let me come for my last quick part to a few elements where FAO is engaged in the region. And the first one I wanted to mention is the Forest and Landscape Restoration Mechanism, which we have heard about already in sessions today during the conference, which is housed by the Forestry Department and which is a program which is funded by a number of institutions. including, by the way, a very, very strong support from the Korea Forest Service, because we have for many years Korea Forest Service is seconding a staff member to FAO's headquarters to work on this FLRM program. So I don't go into detail here. This is a program which obviously is supporting countries in their commitment to the Bonn Challenge. It is linked to the Global Partnership on Forest and Landscape Restoration, and it has a strong team at headquarters, but also decentralized. Here in Asia, we have colleagues based in Beijing. These are four main areas of work which FLRM works at country level: improving and integration of forest and landscape restoration policies. The second one is on field implementation. The third one is on financing, scaling up of forest and landscape restoration. So it's facilitating or supporting countries in resource mobilization. You see here Green Climate Fund. We heard about this just by the speaker before, the GEF and other funding resources. And finally, knowledge generation, capacity development, and so on. And all of these activities of FLRM, they are working at national level and are supporting the national commitments to restoration. Let me finish by just giving you just an insight into a few projects which FLRM is working. For example, in Pakistan, this is a GEF6 project. In the Philippines, we work with an IKI funding, German funding, and GEF6. Cambodia, this is Korea Forest Service. In Fiji, we are working with the Green Climate Fund, Vanuatu with the Adaptation Fund, and finally, at the moment, we are developing regional SITS program for the small island development states under the UN Decade for Restoration, and we have a small regional cooperation program of FAO in the regional office working in a number of countries. So this is just to give you a nutshell what is actually ongoing in countries, in this case with a lead from FAO, but again to say how much actually this has to do with country commitments. And just to close, a few conclusions. In our view, country-level commitment for restoration is essential because that's where restoration has to happen. The programmatic and institutional framework is very conducive. That's what we saw. So both in terms of regional programs, but also of regional institutions which are working on restoration and which are working with countries to support their commitments. It's very, very, very conducive. A large number of completed or ongoing success stories and experience are available. I think that's very important. So we are really we have a lot of experience now. FAO, I showed you examples, but we heard from colleagues before, other projects. So let's use these experiences which are there. Let's build on them. Let's share the experiences and continue upscaling its restoration. And again, this is all finally based on country commitments. And just to conclude, together with many other partners, obviously FAO is fully committed to support country efforts for landscape restoration and to facilitate collaboration across the region. And with this, I thank you for your kind attention and once again for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer, for the very insightful presentation. And next, let me now welcome Mr. Samuel Lampert, Investment Director of Mirova, to respond to the opportunity presented by Landscape Partnership Asia. Mr. Samuel, you are muted, sir.
Mute. Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person to avoid problems like the mute button. I'm here representing Mirova, which is a private sector investment fund manager committed to valuing, conserving, and enhancing natural capital. Mirova is a B Corp, really focusing on how we can shift the economy to a more sustainable model. And we see enormous value and potential in taking a landscape approach to think around how we can enhance restoration in Asia. We see this because of the way the world is starting to recognize the value of ecosystem services. That is partially through population growth and increased demand for food, for water, for energy, and the need to prevent land degradation, to prevent the loss of productive land. And in terms of thinking about the investable opportunity here, a 2019 report by the OECD estimated that there was about $200 trillion lost as a result of ecosystem due to biodiversity loss. And finally, and increasingly, the private sector is really starting to recognize the value of this and the need to provide more capital into this space. Mirova helps by working with private sector investors to apply environmental and social standards and to support the emergence of innovative new structures to create opportunities for positive impact creation. As of the end of last year, we had about 30 billion euros under management, of which about 10% of that was focused on private assets, that's similar to what we've been discussing today, around how we can provide capital into areas such as energy transition, natural capital, and other types of sustainable development goals. We've been active in the carbon markets for over 17 years, starting back working in some of the European markets around the Kyoto protocols. In 2012, we launched the first natural capital fund addressing climate change. In 2015, we partnered with the UN to reach the land degradation neutrality goal. And recently, we've launched new strategies around oceans, around forests, and increasingly around the carbon area. We currently have the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, which is about $200 million, focused on how we can do sustainable supply chains and land restoration. We have the Sustainable Ocean Fund, which is supporting $130 million for oceans and circular economy types initiatives. And we have a number of incubation funds focusing on the carbon markets through partnerships with L'Oréal, with Orange, and with IUCN. The way we operate is we invest directly to help scale up the supply of high quality compensation neutralization projects around natural climate solutions. We support a critical piece of how we operate is that we support the emergence of high standards for integrity in the governance of carbon credits. We want to make sure, we feel that the need for these standards is critical for the successful development of the carbon markets, and particularly the voluntary carbon markets, as they are essential to avoiding any area of greenwashing and kind of perception that this can be around land grabs, but ensuring that the work is being done in such a way that there are co-benefits with local communities. We are very, very optimistic about this time where we see a huge perception around the private sector interest for investments and the potential for scale. This is driven in part by increasing net zero commitments, where corporates are making carbon neutrality a top commitment, and really focused on reducing their own footprint and then finding other ways of removing carbon from the atmosphere in order to address their emissions. We also see a demand for locally produced sustainable commodities that have lower environmental impact, that produce social benefits and special forests with a special focus on zero deforestation. So we see this as an incredibly exciting time to be a private sector investor, working into this space and thinking about how we can mobilize significantly more capital. In order for this to work, we have a couple different considerations. First, I think as many of the other speakers have mentioned today, the importance of working on a landscape level that we consider beyond the project scope and ensure that all stakeholders are brought into the process. We see this as essential to establishing the permanence of projects, that by having local support by communities that are living in the forest, that we have an ability to make sure that the efforts will remain and that there won't be kind of slide back over time as a result of deforestation. The second element that makes a private sector investment critical here is ensuring that there are significant co-benefits either to community, to ensure permanence, or to biodiversity or water services or other types of ecosystem products. This is obviously important for the environmental benefit itself, but also we see it as, from an investor perspective, as part of the way of driving higher price premiums and ensuring that investments made today will be able to be sold on markets in the future. Talking to our investors, one of the key considerations is how do we make sure these investments are able to reduce costs and price volatility as their carbon, in order to meet their net zero goals around carbon emissions and carbon reduction standards. A key part of this is ensuring that there is integrity within the whole process. At Mirova, we rely very, very heavily on standard bodies, and we strive to make sure that all of our credits are issued through kind of standards such as the gold standards or the Verra standard. That this is in the emergence of these standards and the growth and the widespread adoption of these standards would be critical for us to build contracts that are able to be repeatable, that everybody understands, and that when people understand that when they are making these types of investments in forest restoration, there is a clear understanding of what they are actually making an investment in that is additional and then permanent. There's been enormous good news in the last few years. The market is relatively small, but it has been growing quite quickly. It was estimated to be $1 billion of voluntary carbon credits that were sold last year, an increase of about 10 to 20% on year for the last few years. I think the challenges that remain is that it's still much too small. There's very limited liquidity in the markets. This is partially due to the inherent nature of forests and how long it takes to rebuild forest in degraded land. But the challenge becomes, how do you match the investor expectations of needing to have greater liquidity with the needs of the overall ecosystem, and how do you match those things? And intermediaries like Mirova can be really, really effective in this space of matching the denominations in terms of time of the investors to the needs of the underlying projects. Likewise, there's an overall insufficient market size. There's a need to think through how we can divide new and innovative projects that can incubate, scale, and sustain efforts and by doing this, by looking at a variety of different stages in project lifespan, they'll be able to think through different risk-reward profiles, which will again be able to attract new investors into the market. And then finally, thinking through how there are ways to make the transactions today, which are incredibly custom for different environments, make them become standardized. Today, the current approach of investing is very, very time intensive, which adds lots of cost and makes things go much, much slower to where things need to go. And so that we're very excited to be here and to be working with GEA and other partners to support private sector investment at scale in the natural capital space. We, as an international fund manager, are looking for local partners that have strong local networks and relationships with local communities. The Global Evergreen Alliance, for instance, has the expertise in designing business models that enable large-scale restoration programs to restore trees, strengthen ecosystems, improve livelihoods, alleviate poverty, and increase carbon storage. And this is an essential element for us at Mirova for thinking through how we can work with local partners. What we're really good at is providing flexible financing options, whether it's debt investments or equity investments or even prepayment for the provision of carbon credits in the future. We're able to de-risk and diversify our portfolio by thinking through a wide range of different actors. And we're able to ensure that there is integrity throughout all of our activities and adherence to international standards, such as the IFC performance standards for environmental, sustainable, social, and governance. But in order to do that, we need to be finding local partners who understand, who have connections to local communities, and are able to make sure that these projects are done in a way with buy-in and ownership for all. We can provide opportunities to work with international suppliers, corporates. There are acceleration facilities and early stage blended financing. But in order to do that, we need to work with local partners project developments, public project developers, public institutions, NGOs, to make sure that this ecosystem truly emerges. So thank you all. We're very excited to be here and be working with you to build this coalition of public and private partnerships to enable the scale of regeneration projects and help the voluntary carbon markets grow to make long-lasting investments in natural capital. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Samuel Lampert. Now, we are honored to hear from Mr. Dipayan Bhattacharya, Senior Program Advisor with the United Nations World Food Programme.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, distinguished delegates, guests, and my co-presenters. I have not prepared any PowerPoint. My intervention would be fairly short. You know, as World Food Programme, you possibly would be knowing more about our humanitarian work that we are doing globally in different kind of difficult contexts, mostly in fragile conflict and violence affected areas. But also we are working with as many as 80 country governments and various other UN agencies and partners, NGOs, academia, etc., to build their natural resources, to help them and support smallholders, you know, having their ability to produce more, linking them to markets, promoting more and more nutrition sensitive interventions that can not only ensure food security, but also can improve nutritional security, particularly for women and children. We know that food production is possibly the biggest threat to nature. It causes 70% loss of biodiversity. 75% deforestation is as a result of food production and the pressure related to produce sufficient food. 69 or more 70% of the water resources are going towards producing food. So when we are supporting smallholders, we really try to keep all these things into mind. And over the past 7 years, World Food Programme have worked with FAO and various other partners, national governments, local governments, NGOs, etc., to rehabilitate more than 800,000 hectares of degraded land by adopting different kind of context-specific technologies and approaches that could be, half moons that you can see, as the background image in the Zoom. We are promoting more and more integrated watershed management practices, adopting different kinds of soil conservation, measures by, through community participation, promoting different kinds of water harvesting practices that also would be mostly following the nature-based solutions rather than leaning towards gray approaches. So we adopt more and more green approaches to build all these different kinds of natural assets. Now, I would like to mention one very important thing, that when we are talking about regreening or reforestation or restoring degraded land in different kind of landscapes, we try to do that through an integrated programming approach so that we don't really focus primarily on one aspect, to regreen or to restore degraded land, but also we look at what holistically we need to bring into a particular community so that these communities would have sustainable livelihoods and they would be not promoting or practicing, exploitative farming practices. And so that is a very critical thing that I would like to bring in here, that let's not just think about one element when we are thinking about reforestation or rehabilitation of degraded land, but it should be part of a larger integrated programming approach. And also to really see how our interventions are really impacting at landscape level. We collaborate with a number of agencies that provide analysis and also satellite images, including NASA. And these images through a before and after analysis over time has really shown the significant impact that all these activities are bringing in. And these are not just providing, improved livelihoods or providing ecosystem services. What we also have recently measured, for example, in Niger, is that, these interventions are also really sequestering significant volumes, millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide. As my last point, I would also like to mention that in Asia particularly, we have now been working in partnership with and with the support from Green Climate Fund, particularly in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, and also in a host of other countries, Philippines, and few other countries. In Bangladesh, also our intervention is very, very interesting. I actually would be presenting that on May 5th in one of your sessions. It's where a sudden influx of refugees completely destroyed the forest cover in a large area, and our work jointly with FAO, IOM, UNHCR, and the national government of Bangladesh, we have managed to restore the green cover significantly through our interventions over the past 3 to 4 years. So we have all these good practices that are available. And I would like to end with a couple of points, maybe something that we really need to discuss with all the key stakeholders who are part of this initiative and beyond, is we need to really keep people at the center of planning by adopting participatory planning approaches, participatory implementation, and monitoring. This is key for success based on the lessons that we have learned from so many countries. Any land rehabilitation efforts, as I mentioned, should be part of an integrated program that would really eventually enhance people's resilience to shocks and stresses. And as a result, what we need is a multi-stakeholder approach so that we bring in what competitive advantages we all have so that there would be multiplier impact at the community level through complementarity, through co-financing, and through different other kind of mechanisms. I would like to really particularly highlight and appreciate the presentation by the World Bank. And since we are actively working with the GCF financing in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, it would be really good to see possible ways of complementarity and partnerships, and also lessons that we can really exchange and learn from each other's experiences. And we look forward to also partnering with the Landscape Partnership Asia initiative. Our presence in Asia Pacific is pretty large. We are almost there in as many as 17 or 18 countries in Asia and Pacific, and also in a number of countries in the Middle East as well. So we look forward to really working together to promote restoration of degraded lands across Asia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It is now with great pleasure that I invite reactions from the ministers of participating countries. First, we hear from His Excellency Mr. Askarbek Janibekov, Minister of Agriculture, Water Resources, and Regional Development of the Kyrgyz Republic. A simultaneous interpretation will be provided on the channel number 2.
Dear friends, dear ladies and gentlemen, My greetings to all of you here gathered for a meeting devoted to the restoration of arid lands and areas susceptible to the drought. The area of Kyrgyz Republic is about 20 million hectares, and 6% of which are occupied by forests, which is about 1.2 million hectares. Kyrgyz Republic has a concentration of rich variety of biological resources, species, ecosystems, and landscapes. Almost 90% of territory of the Republic lies above 1,500 meters above sea level. About 65% of population of Kyrgyzstan lives in rural areas, and 35% of total population totally depend on the forest around them. The results of National Forest Inventory audit showed that about 13% of forests in Kyrgyzstan suffer from land degradation. Forest resources are exposed to high pressure due to their use as fuelwood, timber, and pastures. In addition to this pressure, due to the growing effects of climate change on the melting of speed of glaciers, Kyrgyzstan is among the countries that, according to forecast, are most susceptible to negative impact and most vulnerable. I have already told about this, but I'm repeating this. According to the forecast, the speed of glacier melting is reaching all the forecasted numbers. Majority of population of Kyrgyzstan depend on forests for their livelihood. And usually these are people from rural areas. And they also do the agronomy. And 49% of all pastures land, which is about 9 million hectares, has been affected by degradation. A draft law has been developed to amend the land code, a law on pastures, which allows for the transformation of 500,000 hectares of low productive pastures, which is comparable to half of the Republic's arable land, which will change the life of 100,000 families. In the new program of development of Kyrgyz Republic from 2022 to 2026, our republic has declared the desire to preserve, restore mountain forest ecosystems. It is necessary to take into account the principle of green growth, to revise the structure of the economy and the transition to a development with minimal impact on natural environment. International obligations form the basis of obligations to restore forest landscapes. In accordance with the obligation of Kyrgyzstan, arising from the Biodiversity Convention, it is planned to plant forest crops on and Kyrgyz Republic cooperates with development partners in the field of forest ecosystem development and improving pastures. Among them is FAO, UNDP, GIZ, KOICA, IFAD, and the World Bank. And Kyrgyzstan is thankful for all this cooperation. Dear partners, dear friends, Kyrgyz Republic is interested and guarantees the fulfillment of its commitments on the restoration of forest ecosystems. And for this purpose, we call on international organizations, financial institutions, and foundations to support initiatives and actions for the conservation and restoration of forest ecosystems in our country. political attention to the forests and the adaptation of the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use at the 26th Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention obliges us to take serious steps to protect and increase the area of forest in Kyrgyzstan. In this regard, the Ministry of Agriculture of the Kyrgyz Republic is ready to cooperate and provide new project proposals for afforestation of arid and unproductive areas of our country. Dear colleagues, today here on stage, here we heard about what the forestry state means. Forestry service means it's glaciers. It means the income of our people. It's the economy of our country. It's pastures. It's the biodiversity. And at the end, it is tourism. Dear friends, only by increasing the area of forests, we can fight the effects of climate change and improving the quality of our life of our people. I urge you to be more active on this, and dear partners, I want you to actively support us. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. May we now please hear from Her Excellency, Ms. Aliya Shalavikova, Vice Minister for Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources of the Republic of Kazakhstan.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants. It's an honor to be here with you, but it's also very difficult to be almost last speaker at this final session today. I will try my best to be brief, but very concrete. In Kazakhstan, as I said already today, we have faced the tragedy of the RLC, and this is the problem that has become not local but global. And now I want to point it pause on several points of the strategy. So the RLC was the fourth largest lake in the world. About 38 species were inhabited in this lake. Were inhabiting in this lake. The population of Saiga was about more than 1 million species, and now we have only part of this lake, which is due to efforts of international organizations and the government of Kazakhstan. So we save the part of this sea, and the level of the water here there now is about 42 meters, and salinity was decreased, and now we can develop fish farming there. So this is one of the efforts that the government of Kazakhstan was already doing. So the main idea now is to decrease the salt desert in this area, and according to the task of the president. We are now planting a saxaul in the seabed of this sea. And as I said already today, we are about to plant on the area of 1,100,100 hectares. Now we are highly support this idea to launch this program on a landscape partnership, Asian landscape partnership for the restoration of drylands and drought-prone areas. What I wanted to highlight is we need some very clear and transparent mechanism how to implement this project. What's the commitment? What will the commitments of both sides, donors and recipients? And according to, if we right now or some days later, we can consider and determine the playground playground rules, we can achieve more results, and everyone will know what to do next in order to successfully implement this project. And as a country with a very small area of forest, Kazakhstan is eager to participate in all activities to plant trees, and we hope that today today presented project will be for the well-being of all citizens in the region, in Kazakhstan and in the region. Because, as you know, this is more than a local area tragedy, but regional. So we encourage to actively start this project, and from our side we try our best to do what we have to do, and hopefully by the next not year but next Congress we can show the results of all our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank all our speakers and participants for this wonderful evening. And we are almost at the end of the event. And lastly, as we have prepared some catering service over there, please enjoy freely. And lastly, for the VIP guests in the first and the second row, a glass of champagne will be served by our staffs. And for others, please bring a glass of champagne for toast.